You know, we all want to be the best parents we can be. But have you ever thought that maybe one of the best ways to figure out what to do is to get a really clear picture of what not to do? That's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive into the tough traits of narcissistic parents. But listen, this isn't about pointing fingers. It's about creating a roadmap, a guide for a better, more empathetic way forward.
I mean, that's the big question, right? How do we become better parents? We all want to give our kids the absolute best start. And sure, there are a million books out there on what you should do, but sometimes the most powerful lessons come from looking at the other side of the coin.
And by really digging into these destructive patterns, we can basically draw ourselves a cautionary map, a guide that shows us all the pitfalls to avoid so we can steer ourselves toward parenting that's way more positive, healthy, and full of empathy. It's all about learning from the negative example.
So this isn't just us talking. Our guide for this whole explainer comes from some really compelling work by authors Shahibda Arabi and research from First 52 Parents. And what's cool is they didn't just sit around and theorize. Nope, they went straight to the source.
They actually surveyed more than 700 adults who grew up in these exact kinds of environments. So what we're getting here is a raw firsthand look at the real impact. And you know, the number one most common trait they found, it really all boils down to one single thing.
And that thing is empathy. Or more specifically, a lack of it. Empathy is like the absolute cornerstone of connection between a parent and a child. When it's not there, the whole foundation just crumbles. And the data they found on this is, well, it's pretty staggering.
Just look at this number, 86%. Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah, 86% of the people surveyed said their parent showed a fundamental lack of empathy. That was the most common trait they found, by far. So it's absolutely where we need to start. But okay, what does a lack of empathy even mean in the real world?
Well, according to the source material, it's pretty straightforward. Empathy is just the ability to understand someone else's point of view, their thoughts, their feelings, to kind of step into their shoes for a minute. So a parent who lacks that, well, they just can't or maybe won't validate their child's emotions. And that leaves a kid feeling completely and totally invisible.
And this empathy gap, it's like a gateway to a whole bunch of other destructive behaviors. The research shows it. Just look at these numbers. 84% reported profound self-centeredness. 58% saw shallow, fleeting emotions. And this one is just shocking. 45% witnessed actual callousness and even sadism. It's all connected. It all stems from that lack of empathy.
So this is a great place to pause and think about our own parenting, right? The opposite of making a child feel invalid isn't about always agreeing with them. It's about acknowledging them. It's about validation. So the question for us is, how can we show our kids that their feelings are totally valid, even when we disagree with them? How do we make them feel heard?
Okay, moving on to the second big theme that came out of the research. This idea of an inflated self-image. This is where the parent's own needs, their ego, their desires, they just constantly steamroll the child's, and that creates a really, really unstable home. And wow, the numbers here really paint a picture, don't they? You've got 76% reporting excessive entitlement, a whopping 70% saying there was a constant need for attention, and 69% dealing with a haughty, condescending attitude and a grandiose sense of superiority. It's clear, in this dynamic, the parent has to be the center of the universe. They're the star, and the child is just a background actor in their parent's movie. And this quote from Maggie, one of the survivors from the study, man, it just hits you right in the gut. She said, "I remember feeling like my mom competed against me for my father's attention. It was like fighting with a sibling. Can you even imagine that, competing with your own mom? It just turns the whole idea of what a parent-child relationship should be completely upside down."
And here's the really damaging part. The lesson that kid learns is, my success is a threat. My accomplishments are a problem. My needs are an inconvenience. And that's a lesson that can stick with you for a lifetime, causing you to constantly downplay your wins and feel guilty for just, having needs. All right, this leads us right into our third and final major theme, this intense, overwhelming need for control. And when that control is threatened, even a tiny bit, it can explode into rage and manipulation.
And yeah, let's talk about the rage. 74%.
That's right, a staggering 74% of the adults in the survey remembered their parent flying into a chronic, excessive rage over the tiniest little thing, what they perceived as a slight. And we're not talking about a parent just having a bad day here. This is a very specific, explosive reaction to what's known as a narcissistic injury.
So what is that? Well, a narcissistic injury is what happens when that big, inflated sense of superiority we just talked about gets pricked, even a little bit. So any disagreement, any perceived criticism, any challenge, it's not just a different opinion to them. No, it feels like a full-on personal attack, and one that they believe has to be punished. And you can see this toxic cycle play out over and over. It's pretty simple. Step 1, a child does something completely normal like says, "I don't like that," or asks for something. Step 2, the parent sees that tiny bit of independence as a personal attack. And then step 3, they explode with a level of rage that is just wildly out of proportion to what actually happened.
This breakdown really shows you the dangerous gap between reality and their perception, right? A child expresses a little independence, the parent sees disobedience. The child disagrees with them, the parent feels like they're under attack. The child simply has their own needs, that's a threat to their control. For a kid living in that world, it's like constantly walking on eggshells. You never ever know what's going to set them off.
Okay, so we've walked through some really difficult territory here. The big question is, where do we go from here? How do we use this cautionary map not to get lost, but to find a better way forward? Well, it really all boils down to self-awareness and making a conscious choice to do things differently.
Look, if there's just one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this simple idea. It's the absolute core difference. A healthy parent's world revolves around the child's needs. They are the sun, providing warmth and stability. But a narcissistic parent demands that the child's world revolves around them. They have to be the sun, forcing the child to orbit their ego. And I really have to say this again. The point of this explainer was never about slapping a diagnosis on anyone. It's about self-awareness. It's about holding up a mirror to these behaviors so that we can recognize them and then consciously, intentionally choose a better path. A path that's all about empathy and validation and putting our kids' well-being right where it belongs, at the absolute center of our world. So I'm going to leave you with this question to chew on. And listen, it doesn't have to be some huge, grand gesture. It can be something small, like putting your phone down when they're talking to you, really listening to that story about their day at school, or just acknowledging their frustration over a broken toy, even if it seems silly to you. So, what's one small thing? One tiny, deliberate action you can take today to make sure your child feels truly, deeply seen and heard.